You've probably heard people talk about the Enlightenment like it was humanity's big step forward. The moment we all learned to think for ourselves. And it did give us science, democracy, modern education. But for Christians, it also created a problem that most of us don't even realize we're still dealing with. Because the way we think about God today, the way we read scripture, pray, and even define faith was all rewritten during that time. It's the reason so many of us feel like our faith makes sense in our heads, but not in our actual experience with the world. So let's talk about it. Grace and peace to the seeker and the saint. I'm Joshua, a Jesus follower and truth seeker. Welcome back to The Truth Intention. So here's what we're asking today. What exactly happened during the Enlightenment that changed Christianity so completely? And why has that change made it so hard to experience the presence of God in any real or tangible way? Because before the Enlightenment, Christianity wasn't just about believing the right ideas, it was about seeing the world as sacred and communing with God in that sacred world. The physical and spiritual were intertwined, and the whole point of faith was communion. Communion with God, with each other, with all of creation. Then came the shift. We learned to think about the world like a puzzle that needed to be solved, rather than a mystery that we got the opportunity to dwell in. And somewhere in that process, we lost something vital, and it's something that reason alone could never give us back. So let's go all the way back to before the Enlightenment to start this conversation and see what Christianity actually looked like before that change. The early church didn't just believe in God, it believed that everything was alive with His presence, that the divine wasn't distant. It was the thing in which we all live and move and have our being. It's the very air we breathe and the life-giving presence that animates all of us. People didn't compartmentalize their spirituality to Sunday morning. They lived inside that spirituality. When they prayed, they expected God to listen. When they worked the land, they thought they were partnering with God in creation, not just optimizing soil for maximum crop growth. But reason wasn't just denied in all of this. Scholars and mystics didn't see reason as opposed to faith. Reason, in fact, was a way to worship God with our minds. But their goal also wasn't just to explain away all the mystery in the world. It was to go deeper into it. Studying was like praying, and thinking was an act of worship. Reason was there to support faith, not to tear it down, and certainly not to be entirely separate from it. They weren't two different things in the eyes of the early church. Now, was this world perfect? Of course not. It had superstition, corruption, abuse, and at times, unholy union of church and state. But underneath that, there was a shared imagination, a way of seeing reality as sacred, not just a random collection of molecules, and that imagination held the church together. Then came the Enlightenment. And it started as a good thing, as a reaction against the abuse of power and against ignorance. A push for freedom, education, and progress. But at its core, it changed the way people thought about truth. Thinkers like Descartes, Locke, and Kant argued that knowledge should only come from human reason and observation, never through revelation or tradition. Things like interpretation, revelation, and experience lost all meaning in light of the sacredness with which these thinkers held reason alone, or solo ratio. And while that opened the door for a great deal of scientific discovery, it quietly closed the door on something else. Mystery, imagination, that thing that held the early church together. And the new rule was simple. If it can't be measured, it isn't real. So faith, miracles, divine presence, all of that was written off into the margins. Rather than a temple to the Creator God and us as His image bearers, ruling and reigning in His stead, the universe became a machine. You and I merely cogs in the machinations. And the God of that temple? Barely a hypothesis, chalked up to ancient thought and mythology. Sure, maybe there is a power that built the system and set it running, but that Creator could never really be active in creation. For Christians, that shift has been devastating, and we've barely even noticed that it's happened. Because when the culture decided that reason alone defined reality, the church had a choice. Either adapt to be respectable or risk being labeled as irrational. So theology all began to change. Miracles were explained as metaphors. The resurrection was a symbol of hope, but not a historical event. Faith was reframed as a privatized spirituality that provided a moral high ground for those who had it. The goal was to make Christianity reasonable, respectable to the modern mind. And at first, this looked like a win. People looked at us like we had some brains about us, casting off the miracles of our book, the superstitions of those who went on before us. But in making Christianity rational, we made it small, because a faith that can be fully explained can no longer be fully alive. So when the Enlightenment redefined truth, the church fractured. Some went all in on reason, and we can see the direct line from that movement into liberal theology. Others rejected reason entirely, and by the same logic, that sort of became revivalism. On the one side, Christianity turned into a moral philosophy. Be good, do good, and don't talk about miracles. On the other, it turned into pure emotion, experience elevated above everything. Don't think too hard, just feel the Spirit moving. And both sides were actually just reacting to the same wound, the loss of mystery and our ability to interact with it. The rationalists stripped out the supernatural. The revivalists overcorrected with emotion and sensationalism. But the ancient faith always held those two things together, certainly with a bit of tension, but always in unity. The mind and the heart, the intellect and the imagination, reason and revelation. That integration was the soul of Christianity, and once it split, the church never recovered. It still hasn't today. At this point, as far as we've strayed from how faith used to be, can we recover? I think so, because the Enlightenment didn't destroy Christianity. It just made it thinner. It trained us to approach faith as an idea instead of an encounter. That's why so many people today can perfectly explain what they believe, but still feel disconnected from God. We lost the mystical imagination we used to have, the ability to see God not just above creation, but within it. So how do we get it back? First, we've got to recover a bigger way of knowing. Reason is good, but it was never meant to be the end-all and be-all of Christianity. Faith and reason are meant to work together. So learn, study, think deeply, but don't assume that logic is going to capture the fullness of the divine. Truth is relational and discovered in encounter, not just in argument. We've also got to re-enchant our daily life. Stop separating the spiritual from the ordinary. Pray while you work, or better, let your work be an act of prayer. Look for God in nature, in people, in quiet moments. Take the sacraments seriously. Practice spiritual disciplines. Do small things with intention, because the sacred is often hiding within the mundane. And then we've got to rebuild community around presence, not performance. Church isn't a brand, it's a body. So share meals, pray together, listen and confess to one another. Create spaces where people can encounter God, not just learn about Him. If the Enlightenment trained us to believe about God, then our task now is to remember how to believe in and with God again. The Enlightenment gave us progress, but it also left us spiritually homeless. It taught us how to think, but made us forget how to wonder. It elevated reason at the cost of relationship. I'm not saying Christianity needs to abandon intellect. It doesn't. It just needs to remember intimacy. The God who created the laws of physics is the same God who still breathes in the wind, the same God whose image you and I both bear. And reason alone will never be enough to replace that. If you like this and are looking for ways to practically live this sort of thing out, I do have a video which you can find right here where I talk about some of the spiritual disciplines that help me to remember how presence works and find the sacred in the mundane. I'll see you over there. Till then, go in peace, walk in truth, follow always the law of love.